Processes and tools dominate today's Agile discussions, but we are devoted to the individuals and interactions that make it work. From the beginner to the veteran practitioner, we have something for you. Welcome to Agile for Humans.
Welcome to this week's episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Joining me today, a former guest. So she is a veteran, Allison Pollard. Allison, how are you?
Good.
So last time we talked, I think you had done a presentation with Barry Forrest at Agile Indy.
Yes.
I think that was the last time we had you on the show. A lot of fun down there. I was surprised. I'm always surprised at how amazing these local events are. I think Agile Indy, 700-800 people, just a massive event. Really cool stuff down there.
Yeah, it's hard to think of any of these events as being small anymore because I'm noticing a number of them are growing, 100 people a year. So it's pretty incredible.
It really is, and I really enjoyed that conversation. Our brewmaster friend Barry's not with us this time. We have Allison. It's just going to be the two of us, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We don't get a chance to talk like this very often. I think we saw each other last at the Agile Coaching Summit.
Yes, so you put on in Chicago, great city.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You were gracious enough to share your wedding anniversary, I think.
Yes, yeah. My husband decided to join me for the weekend in Chicago. Married 9 years. So it was really nice that he's gracious enough to let me do stuff like that.
Yeah, so we're very glad that you were able to do that. I think that was a lot of fun, and you definitely helped make that event much, much better. So thanks for that. And now that we're here, I think we have a few good topics. So I'm actually, and two of these are topics that we'll just get into them, but these have been talked about a lot, especially in the Slack channel for Agile for Humans, and I think a lot of people are really pondering self-organization. It's a word. We toss this around so much.
And I mean, what other, areas or industries do you hear people talk about self-organizing, as frequently as you do in Agile land? It's such a scientific term, and I think most of us forget, what does it mean to allow for self-organizing or witness self-organizing? Having a group that is really choosing how to operate together. I had been reading a number of articles by Margaret Wheatley in the last week or so. She's a fantastic organizational change agent. She's worked in just about every kind of organization you can imagine, and she's published these articles where she started digging into some of the science of complexity and really reflecting on, self-organizing behaviors and the kinds of relationships that you see in companies where people are enabled to, adopt change together. They're able to find alignment and work through some of the difficulties. And she had talked about a fractal nature of behaviors in organization that I also thought was really interesting. When you look at the different layers of a company, and there's still quite a few in my experience, from executives to middle management down to the teams, what commonalities do you see in the behaviors and how things work? What's talked about, what's not talked about.
So not to give away too much of Margaret's punchline, but what are you finding to be the commonality there? Because this is a topic. So this actually came up in a episode that we recorded recently that isn't out yet, where the question was posed basically, why is this all so hard? Or why is it still so hard after 20 years of Agile? And it came down to this topic.
Yeah, well, it was interesting as I was reading through her articles. She's been working with organizations for a couple of decades. And so her more recent work talks about how she's not really there to impose a certain change on an organization. She's really approaching it more like she's there to help witness change, to help people work through the process on their own, but with her grounding presence, I guess. as I read through it, I thought, wow, she's on such a different wavelength from where I am, because I'm still noticing some attachment to outcomes in myself of like, no, I want you to change, and I want it to be something in this kind of area away from this other thing. That I still see that in Agile, especially, like, even though we recognize it might be about values or a mindset or a culture, and that's still pretty fuzzy, we're aiming towards something and away from something else, rather than really being able to stand with a team, an organization, a group of leaders, and help them find themselves, whatever that means.
So is this really a distinction between having an agenda as a coach and then between that and facilitating co-creation? Is that a way to frame it?
I'm liking that. Yes.
And so as we ponder that for a minute, what are the dangers of actually because I think what you've expressed here is something that perhaps I do this. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people do as well. We walk into with the change that we want to make, or we've been brought in to make a specific change.
Yeah.
And so I think you're implying a danger there that perhaps maybe you would unwrap for us.
Sure. And this is going to be me talking out loud, not really, stuff I've clarified previously.
It'd be a horrible podcast if it was just your inner monologue.
I know, right? Or let me pull out my script right now and read from that. Right. So I'm with you on, like, we're brought in typically for a certain kind of change. We're Agile Lean practitioners. We're brought in for that Agile Lean stuff that we do. I do recognize that there are times, if I'm working in an organization and it feels like their appetite for change has dwindled or diminished, that probably means the end of our relationship, at least, our working relationship, that co-creation of something. And I guess I kind of wonder, what do I wonder? Does that make sense? Is that us having still too much attachment to where we're trying to go with somebody? Versus if I really was there as like pure coach, anywhere that they as client want to go is going to be okay. They drive the agenda. Maybe that relationship would have more longevity to it. Or maybe I would be showing up to it a bit differently, where if they were no longer as motivated for, say, Agile change, I would be more okay with that. And maybe we would find something else to be exploring together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's one of my biggest struggles as a coach. I think Lisa Adkins did a great job of articulating this in her book, Coaching Agile Teams, where we're not attached to the outcome.
Right.
So we're in service of the organizations and teams that bring us in. But the outcome is not on us as a coach. And I've always struggled with that a little bit. It's, well, what do you mean the outcome isn't on us? And I get wrapped around the axle a little bit on this, but I also find that organizations, when they bring in a coach, they do have an outcome in mind. And the expectation is for us to drive that outcome. And so there is this kind of conflict in the way that we're brought in, but then the way that by an organization who's paying us, but then the way that we're actually supposed to show up and coach to get the maximum result. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like there's a certain leap of faith that we as coaches have to do. We know that we're brought in to help with Agile transformations, and there's a recognition that if you're trying to drive or push or, just kind of bully an organization into Agile, it's not going to go very well. Versus if you are inviting people in, if you're asking questions, helping them understand what does Agile mean to them and what might it look like, and help them find changes on their own, you're having to be that more objective or like less tied to outcome stance. And that's the leap of faith of like, I believe that if I can show up without trying to push them that they will find a way to be more agile than if I actually tried to teach and push and bully and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and what's amazing is that this is still even a conversation, because I think we've all found as coaches and consultants that coercion doesn't work. Right?
True, but I also recognize, like, we each have egos, right? Like,
oh yeah,
who doesn't want to put on their resume, like, I helped this massive organization transform, and it was case study after case study and raving success for the industry, like, what is it that we can put on our resumes and say, like, I accomplished that, when it is, in fact, the work that our clients do, the teams that we coach, the organizations that we work in.
Well, and perhaps it's enough that we held space, right? And we helped people. Actually, we didn't show them anything. We helped them see what could be possible. But that doesn't sound as awesome on a resume as, I transformed the biggest bank in the world to Agile.
Exactly. Because, how many interviews do you go in for Agile coach roles? And it's like, cool, I would like you to hold some space so I can see if I like what you do and how you do it.
That's right. Never. Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I mean, I know when I'm interviewing coaches or even Scrum Masters, I do have a part towards the end, if it's a face-to-face, where I like to have them coach me, because I want to get an understanding of, like, what is your demeanor like? How are you going to interact with a team or maybe a leader in the organization? Are you being thoughtful in the kinds of questions that you're asking? Are you, one, are you listening? Are you actually paying attention? But then there's also, like, if you are going to give me advice, is it useful? Are you coming up with some things that I might not have considered or that might actually be helpful for me? Or are you going to come at it from a very dogmatic standpoint, or, make me feel patronized somehow because you've decided you're the expert and I just need to do something else differently?
Yeah, I like that exercise, and I do something similar, especially with Scrum Masters that we're considering hiring, and I just ask them to teach me Scrum. Yeah. And when I work with a new team, not one of the first, but early on, I typically ask, all right, teach me how you work. Yeah. And so just to have them walk through, and what I have found is that by having them become the teacher, and you're just the person asking questions and not like leading questions, like, are you sure it's not the daily scrum instead of the stand-up? Not that's important. Language is important, but not a leading question, but just, so how does that sprint retrospective work for you? How do you, just having them peel that apart, I think it creates opportunities and maybe even the space to have some teachable moments, right? But it's they're directing it. And and that's the hardest part because of my ego too, right? Because I have it, like you point out, we all have it. I want to be at the front saying, this is what we do and here's our orders. But what I've found is when they're directing the conversation, I'm asking questions or making very light suggestions, things go a little bit better. And I'm sorry, I cut you off. But
well, I was going to say, like, even asking the team to explain how they work, that's going to take a certain amount of trust in that relationship between you and them. Yep. For them to actually say, okay, here's the truth, good, bad, and ugly. Right. Because I have seen, sometimes coming in as a consultant, the team might have been told, oh, this expert's coming in, she's here to fix us and make everything better. And so as I start asking those questions, like, so how do you guys do this? You can tell they're dancing between here's some of the truth, and then here's what we know is like the textbook answer that we think you want to hear. And so it's actually having to go, you guys, like, the textbook answer, like, I'm glad you're aware of that. It's more beneficial right now to learn how you're actually doing things.
Right. Yeah, there is that fear, especially because when we walk into places, it sometimes feels like it's an assessment. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right? Because like you said, the expert's here. If we don't give the right answers, they're going to tell our bosses we're failing. And there's a story, and I don't remember who tells it, but when they were going in to do an assessment, the team had put together fancy burned out down charts, and they looked perfect. Oh, wow. Right? And he started asking questions about these charts, and finally one of the it was actually one of the product owners. She kind of pulled him aside and said, "Look, we made all these things and put them on the walls because you're the expert. And this is what we're supposed to be doing." And then she walked through what they were actually doing, and it all sounded reasonable. And so the consultant went back and said, "No, the teams are doing great." But I think that's a real thing where, maybe part of that whole holding space and maybe all of that is predicated on that trust and that kind of psychological safety first. And maybe sometimes we jump the gun and think that we can jump to step 6 when we haven't even established that relationship yet.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is kind of like, okay, it's like I'm going to the doctor and they're asking me about, my lifestyle. And it's like, do I really want to tell you I haven't been to the gym in the last couple of weeks? Or do I want to say, well, like generally I work out on a regular basis?
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a difficult conversation if you don't trust the person. But I like that. So what are you doing in your practice to help not necessarily directly about a client, but as you're working with new teams, as you're establishing that relationship, as you're pushing your ego to the back, as many of us have to do, what are you finding that's helping you get yourself in this kind of mindset where it's not about the outcome, it's about the discovery, it's not about my agenda, it's about what we co-create as a team? How are you bringing some of those, I like to call them golf swings, but or swing thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So, keep my hands in a certain place and then I swing and I hit the ball better. But what are you doing to help bring some of those thoughts forward?
I guess because I usually start off with a talk with the Scrum Master before I meet with the full team to get some of that background information of like, how are things going right now? How are you feeling in the Scrum Master role? Let's talk about what it might be like when I start attending your team's meetings. One question I typically ask is if I'm in the meeting with the team, say it's a sprint planning, maybe a sprint retrospective, and I start to notice something, would you like me to bring it up right then and there, or would you prefer that you and I, Scrum Master and Agile coach, talk about it offline, one-on-one? It starts to set some expectations. It also means that I'm trusting the Scrum Master of you can get through your team's event. However, there will be learning and growth, whether that means it's happening right then in the moment or it's going to come afterwards and you're going to get better the next time around.
So it sounds like you're establishing a working agreement with the Scrum Master as you work with their teams and making sure they're comfortable with what you're about to do. And maybe that's the key step right there. It's really, when you're working with a new team, the Scrum Master and you have a conversation, you have the working agreement. It's really a coaching agreement, isn't it? Right.
Yeah. And because I had realized, like when I was Scrum Master, I never had an Agile coach. So I didn't really have someone that was just, meant to be popping in and popping out of my meetings and trying to help us get better. So I would typically start talking to the other Scrum Masters, like who my peers were, and going, okay, like I'm about to try a new retrospective. Would you mind coming to my team's retro so you could observe me and how I'm doing things and give me feedback afterwards? Because I want my team to be focused on the actual event and trying to get better based on the learnings from the previous sprint. And it's helpful if I can have someone that can give me more directed feedback. So I was trying to build like a buddy system versus now as I show up as an Agile coach, like I'm your new buddy, whether you asked for me or not in a number of ways. So let's figure out how to make that, work for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion there. And thanks for bringing that forward. This idea of self-organization, this idea of coaching agreements, I think these are things that we often, at least I'll just speak for myself. I won't speak for everybody, but I can get so interested in trying to solve things that I don't stop to lay some of that groundwork so in fact, I end up becoming an impediment for the first couple days just because I didn't do that work. And so it's an interesting reminder. So I really like that.
Well, and I find that I fall into kind of a trap as well. It's like there's so many assumptions that we all make about what Agile coaching is. Like I show up in an organization, well, they've already had some Agile coaches, or they've talked to Agile coaches, or they've researched Agile coaches. So they think they know what it looks like. I have an understanding of what I do and what I think it looks like, but we haven't had that shared conversation to make sure that we're actually aligned and that we know what this is going to be for us and what's going to work and what's not going to work. So like you said, it's creating some working agreements, some coaching agreements, and just like when we have the team define their working agreements, like this is something that we can revisit and continue to redefine as we go on.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Do you have any resources that you turn to when you're trying to figure out the working agreements or the coaching agreements, or even like the coaching stances? Do you have any favorite go-tos that the listeners out there could use?
Let's see. So I've been through the Coaches Training Institute courses, and so I know they provided some resources to anyone that's been through like the fundamentals class. There's the book Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart is one that I really enjoyed. What makes it interesting is they talk about, you're brought in as, for them, executive coach. You're typically going to be working with like the executive's direct reports. So you want to connect like what are the business results that they're looking for to the team behaviors that you're trying to establish, as well as the executive's behaviors. So like, what does that leader need to be doing? So it's recognizing that the team's behavior is not completely independent. You're going to have to connect it to the person that they all report to. And so it has a bunch of good questions in there to really feel out those relationships and how things might go.
Very cool. Well, thanks for those.
Yeah.
So something else that I think a lot of people are talking about, but we talked about a little bit before the show. If we're ready to move on, are you ready to move?
Sure.
So Scrum.
I
love Scrum. I'm a big fan of it. I don't know if we've talked about this on the show yet. I've recently become a professional Scrum trainer through scrum.org, so I have definitely hitched my wagon to the Scrum train. Mm-hmm. That's the wrong metaphor. But
wait, hold on.
Wait, flip it, reverse it, correct it. All right. But anyways, so something we talked about is how Scrum is kind of silent or agnostic about certain topics. And one of them that you brought up that I thought was really interesting was how to hold a team accountable.
Yeah. Accountability I find to be a really difficult subject to discuss. Because I find more often than not, when someone uses the word accountability, it's like they have a baseball bat in their hands and they're like ready to go use it on somebody. And I prefer more of a neutral stance on it. I think Brené Brown had talked about it in Rising Strong, where it's really like taking account of where we are. We thought we were going to be journeying to this location. Now that we look at the map, we see that we've gone off course slightly. So let's take account of what got us to this different destination and what might we do from that going forward. That
would be wonderful if that was the normal usage of that word, of the word accountability. I'm part of Christopher Avery's responsibility process group, so I do the monthly calls with him. And accountability and responsibility have very distinct meanings in the Leadership Gift program. Accountability is something imposed on others, and responsibility is something that comes from within you. Right? And so when I hear the word accountability, I cringe, kind of like what you were saying. There's someone with a baseball bat ready to hold you to account. And I find that really does not work great in an Agile setting. That the old stick coming out, the carrot didn't work, so now the carrot of self-organization didn't work, so now we're going to swing the stick when the team fails. I find that that's not productive. Holding a team accountable is interesting in a Scrum context, though. So where are your thoughts on that?
So I remember actually interviewing at a client, and I was talking to their COO, and he wanted to know, like, what was I going to be accountable for as like the Scrum Master, and who on the team was going to be accountable for certain things. And so I told him, like, if I hold one team member accountable, that may or may not enable everyone else to work with that person, to collaborate with them and, feel like responsible for the results. However, if I'm holding the whole team, that whole group accountable collectively, they're going to start holding one another accountable for those individual commitments or individual promises that they're making to one another. So that's where I look at it almost like a physics problem rather than anything else. Of I have this group, I have this collection, and I just think like a circle. How am I putting force towards like the entire circle so that they start holding one another more responsible for the things that they're saying that they're going to do, day by day or sprint by sprint, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. I also, when I'm having, and this conversation comes up a lot in organizations, right? So where's the single throat to choke was the question I was once asked. And I said, well, hopefully nowhere, because that's assault. And the executive gave me a funny look. I thought it was hilarious. Like most of my jokes, I think they're hilarious, and people don't laugh. But those questions come up a lot. Who's accountable, who's responsible. What I've found is that in the latest update to the Scrum Guide, not the one coming out next month, but the prior one, the 2017 update or the 2016 update brought the Scrum values back into play.
Yes.
And so I think that was really just a breath of fresh air into the Scrum framework.
I found that people had one of two reactions to that. It was either like, hallelujah, this is justifying what I do as a human that's focused on helping other humans, or it was met with like, oh, okay, that's nice.
Yeah.
And like people just like moved on with their day.
Yeah, I certainly fell in the first camp.
Yeah.
When we explained commitment, especially framed in a way where it's a commitment to the Scrum framework, it's a commitment between team members to one another. I really thought that was powerful, and it really helps. It helped me at least frame this accountability versus responsibility discussion a little better. I think it definitely helps out there. The courage, the focus, the openness, the commitment, and the respect. All of those things. I think I got all 5 of them. All of those things interchange and actually create that culture of responsibility or account. I think the Scrum Guide uses the word accountability. I think it really helps to create that culture to where it's not, like, I agree with you. Sometimes with a team, you're definitely pushing on that whole circle, that whole bubble. But as the Scrum values, I think, permeate the team, they start living it. There's that moment where the team shifts from doing Scrum to being in the service of others. And I think that's where responsibility or accountability kicks in, but I think it's where the Scrum values are lived. And that's for me, that's why I got really excited about the addition, because a lot of these difficult conversations we have about, who's going to swing the stick and who gets the carrot, those kind of go away when teams kind of make that turn and transition, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because it's like, regardless of what your company values are or like how your culture is doing things today, Scrum is now planting these 5 values into your team, and it's going to start to disseminate across your organization. And it's like, what's the soil like where you are? Can those actually start to take root and grow? And it reminds me of, in Speed of Trust, there's this metaphor of a tree. And so at the very bottom, those roots, it's integrity. And I think of it like, okay, if I have these 5 values that I'm now living into, courage, commitment, focus, openness, respect, that's going to help me, become more intentional in the goals that I have. I'm going to start building up my capabilities. I'm going to start seeing more and more results. And so it's building up the rest of the tree so that you can have more trust, in yourself, in your organization, in the relationships that you have.
Yeah, I think it definitely starts there. And as that tree grows out, you start seeing the improvements in empiricism. When those values are lived, it's very easy to have transparency, to inspect and adapt. It's no longer scary to have your good and your bad work exposed and changed and modified. But I also found, and maybe we're drifting a little bit from how Scrum is agnostic, but even answering some of the difficult questions. Someone will say, well, can I as a Scrum Master be the Scrum Master for 3 teams? Well, can you live up to the 5 Scrum values or the 5 values of Scrum while in service to 3 different teams? And can you live up to your commitments of coaching each team, coaching the organization, working with the product owner for 3 different teams? And I think that frames the conversation. It's just a different way to look at it, but I think it was a powerful one, because then you can start saying, well, no, I can't meet that responsibility. I can't meet that accountability. And those values just swoop in and give you that backdrop and almost that safety to say so. I really thought that was a powerful addition. So sorry for the tangent, but I thought that was a fun, that was an important change, at least in my view. Yeah. Well, and again, it's important that the Scrum Guide actually continues to get updated. I think it's a really great way of being agile, of actually adopting, new ideas that are great, or getting back in tune with some of the roots of, where did Scrum come from initially, and how do we get more connected and more aligned with that? And again, that part where Scrum is going to be very, very simple, very lightweight, and stay agnostic on some areas, it can be frustrating that Scrum doesn't give you answers of how do I have this conversation, or what does it mean for me to do this, or what does it mean for us to do that? But it's that recognition that there's more than one way of doing it, and any of those methods could be really, really great. And so Scrum is not going to try and tell you one and exclude all the others. It's actually going to stay silent and let you explore. Yeah, and I think that's critical to the kind of work we do. We're not working in just a complicated space. We're in a complex space where there's more unknown than there is known. And so our job is to wrangle that complexity back into something complicated and ship it. In my view, right? And
yeah.
If you're a Kneffen fan, maybe I butchered that a bit, but when you're doing that, being too prescriptive is just such a limiting factor. I mean, and if you really, honestly, if this will fire people up, but if you want prescriptive, here's exactly how to do it type Scrum, do SAFe. I mean, you're drifting back into a waterfall model that way, but I mean, that's an option. If you really don't want to explore, if you want it laid out for you, if you want to go back to some of the phase gates and some of the 6-month release trains and there's an option. But I think what Scrum has done beautifully is left, maybe it held the space for you to explore, like what we were talking about earlier. Here's a framework with 3 roles, a handful of events, a few rules. Or it's 5 events, a few rules, and 3 artifacts. Very simple, right? 3-5-3. Not a lot there. 17 pages, and go explore and be prosperous. It's like, okay. And I find power in that. What I also found interesting when you're talking about the old, or how Scrum has evolved, I've actually picked up, and I've been reading through the original book. So I don't know if you've seen, I'm sure you have, the old, the Ken Schwaber and Mike Beadle book. And it is fascinating as I'm reading through it going, nope, that's not it anymore. Nope, that's not. But it's kind of fun to see how this framework has evolved. And what I think they've done well is that it's almost evolved through subtraction.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So it went from, it was more. It's become, they added the Scrum values have always been there. I think the latest update was a clarification of those values or a restatement. But the way that it is continued to stay simple and in some cases become more simple, I think is actually really impressive.
Yeah. No more paying $1 to the Scrum Master if you're late for the daily Scrum. Like, you guys can figure out your own working agreement around that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I did that once a number of years ago. There was a late jar, but yeah, no more of that, right?
Yeah.
So what else do you have going on? What else is, I think I love the 2 topics you brought forward, the self-organization, Scrum being agnostic. I think we can continue into either one of these if you like, or is there something else that perhaps isn't as well formed that you'd like to dig into?
Well, I guess I've been kind of geeking out on, what's my differentiator as a coach? Like, what are the things that I like to do? Like, how am I different from other Agile coaches? And I think that's an area that we sometimes gloss over. Well, okay, you want an Agile team coach? Great. What is it that person's going to come in and do? They're probably going to observe, and they're asking some questions. They might do some lightweight training, and then they'll probably continue to work with the team, make some suggestions, and eventually they'll transition off. It sounds the same when you talk to coach to coach to coach, but I do think that each of us bring in our own different styles, our different values, our different strengths, and that can look quite different from one person to the next. And so sometimes it's really difficult, I think, for organizations to understand what is it that you're getting if you hire this coach versus that coach. And so I've been trying to figure out, how might we explore that and articulate that a bit better.
So the differentiator. So there's an interesting book that I've been looking through, and I'm going to blank on it. The guy that did Simon Sinek, the guy that did Start With Why, Sinek,
yeah, mm-hmm.
He did a workbook with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the Start With Why workbook. Been flipping through that because I have the same question. When I go to do a training course, mm-hmm. why should someone have me do their Scrum training over someone else?
Mm-hmm.
What do I bring? And so what are you discovering in that space? What have you figured out? What makes Allison Allison?
So I realized, I love helping change, and it's not for me to come in and, kind of have my mental assessment of how things are going, make my observations, ask my questions, and then provide recommendations. It's actually far better for me to hold some space and allow for some intentions of, I'm going to help make it safe. I'm going to help bring in some courage. I'm going to help bring in some creativity, whatever I think might be needed for that particular group, whether it's a team or an organization, for them to find how to make change. And I put it like that because I had started at a client, and I had met with the team. I had met with the leadership during the interview process. We all knew this was Allison's coming in to help us adopt Scrum and figure out how we improve our delivery. And so the first day I observe, I ask some questions. The second day I mostly observe and I ask some questions. And by day 3, I'm like, hey, y'all, I thought I'd be observing and asking questions for another week or so, but this seems really painful. Would you be open to changing a few things right away? And they're like, oh, thank God, yes. And so again, it was that recognition of, it's not for me to come in and play expert. It really is for me to help provide some grounding for the necessary changes to happen. Because up until then, it was just conflict for that group, for that organization. Just a lot of friction that I found it unbearable by day 3. So that's why I was like, hey, I know that things can be different. I've seen different in other organizations. I really believe that you guys are capable of finding a better way. Are you ready to have that conversation? And again, coming in as a consultant, I'm noticing that companies are ready for change right away. That's why they brought me in. They've been dreaming about what this change is going to be as they've been interviewing for consultants or coaches or just thinking about what could happen for them. And so if I'm courageous enough to just step into cool, so how are things and what do you want to do about it, without feeling like I need to understand what you do today, that's actually the best way I can service a group.
What do you think about the idea that Agile coaching is just really organizational change management?
There's a part of me that can absolutely buy into that. I guess I also have been studying enough on professional coaching that I see that sometimes it's a lot of professional coaching. So we're in this weird Venn diagram, intersection between a couple different areas. I had actually read an article last week. It's a McKinsey article on helping an organization become agile. But their sense of what that meant was helping an organization to form teams and dissolve them quickly in order to meet specific initiatives, let's say. And I had tried to share this with some peers, with some colleagues, and because it was so antithetical to Agile software development teams, where we are typically looking at having a group of people dedicated to product development and staying together for a very long period of time, they just couldn't get their head wrapped around the notion of agility might mean teaming and reteaming very, very often, very, very frequently. But I felt comfortable enough playing with that idea, especially after hearing Heidi Helfand's dynamic reteaming presentation a couple years ago. So I think there's still a lot more that we could be learning from some of these other areas like organizational change management and professional coaching. I also see that there's a lot they can learn from us because we're okay to make change and do it very quickly and not think through all of the steps sometimes.
Definitely. Do you think that just the fact that a company brings in a consultant, like one of us, maybe does that create the permission to think about what's new and what's possible? And maybe
I think so. Absolutely. And I know that's where it can also be frustrating sometimes for the employees that here comes in the consultant and they're just saying the same things that you've been trying to say as an employee. Yep. I'd actually partnered with a Scrum Master at one client because I knew she was feeling pretty down. And so I talked to her one-on-one. She said, I'm really frustrated because it feels like you've been given full permission to do the things that I've been wanting to do. And I said, oh, girl, this is your chance. Tell me what you've been wanting to do. And let's use my clout. Let's make this happen. You're the one that's going to be living here and working here, so to speak, after I'm gone. So This is the time.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, Allison, I'm interested in the professional coaching topic. And so this is an area that I am deficient, and I am openly deficient. We've talked about this on the show. I try to listen. I try to ask questions. I try not to problem solve too much. I think some of the basics, maybe we'll call me an advanced beginner. How about that? Mm. Maybe that's a little gracious, but where could I go? I know that you have a number of certifications or some education in this area. If the listeners out there, if they're also like me, where coaching may not be, it's something that we do, but it's something that maybe we'd like to take it to a professional level. Maybe that's the right way. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but maybe it's time to take it to a professional level. What are your recommendations? What have you found to be helpful to your practice? You
might be strongly in the conscious incompetence. You're practicing, but you're so self-aware that you might be getting in your own way. Because I know when I went through coaching training and then certification, I was so self-aware of every potential mistake, the strong inner judgment coming through. It drove me nuts. But it gave me a lot more empathy for people that I'm coaching now. So I think a number of folks are going through the Agile Coaching Institute's training, the Coaching Agile Teams class, and that's where they're learning about some of the professional coaching skills. That's a great introductory. Still within the Agile coaching offerings, I know that Agile for All, Jake Calabrese and Trisha Broderick have a class, and Sue Johnston up in Canada, It's All Understood. She has a professional coaching class for Agilists. You could also explore the Coaches Training Institute. So it's the largest and I think the oldest coaching school. Just go through fundamentals. It's typically a Friday through Sunday class. It is so experiential. I remember on Sunday as we were closing out the class, we went around the circle, with some appreciations. And I said, I don't know when and how I learned all this stuff because there was never really lectures. But I feel a lot more competent as a coach than I did, just a few days ago. Because you're going to be watching some demonstrations and then doing some skill drills. And so you're getting an idea of what are these different muscles? What are these different things I might be doing as a professional coach? And starting to lean into those a bit more heavily. So you don't even have to do the full series, just that single course really helps you as a professional coach.
Cool. Thanks for those. I think one that is on my radar for next year is coaching beyond the team with Esther Derby and Don Gray.
Yes, that's another great one for sure.
So I think between all the ones Allison mentioned and then Don and Esther's course, we've got plenty of ways to spend our time and treasure on getting better at coaching. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
So Allison, I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. We're hitting up on our time box. So being the good Scrum Masters that we are, we know that we have to respect our time boxes. So at this point of the show, I'd like to invite you to, promote anything that you have going on. Someday I'm sure you'll have a book in process or your own podcast or some other promotional vehicle. Anything that you've got going on, we'd love to hear about it. And then if you could tell the listeners how to continue the conversation with you, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, so right now it's that funny time of year where you're really looking at submitting to the future conferences, which for me is fun because I've created so many new talks and worked with different co-presenters this year that I thought I was going to be set and not need to create anything new. And then every once in a while you find a person that you're like, man, I really want to work with you on a thing. And so let's invent a thing together. So Jason Knight from Tulsa, he and I are working on a couple ideas to submit for conferences next year. And then Marcus King and I will be doing a workshop in January at Code Mash. So it's a very developer-centric conference. I know he's really excited. I'm really curious to check it out myself because I've heard such great things from our other developers, even though that's not really my territory. And Improving apparently hosts a big board game room. So all the gamers like to hang out and get together. And if you want to keep talking to me, I'm on Twitter at Allison_Pollard.
Very good. Thank you, Allison. I always enjoy these conversations. I wish we could do them more often. We'll have to steal some more time with you or from you
totally
in the near future to get you back on the show. This was tons of fun. So thank you.
Thanks.
And as for me, your host, Ryan Ripley, well, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Ripley. RyanRipley.com is the website that hopefully you're listening to the show on. If you're not, you're probably on iTunes. If you're on iTunes, please leave us a review. 5 stars is always appreciated, but do be honest. If you'd like to take it a step further in your support, first of all, thank you for sharing the show. The numbers are going up month over month, and that means you're sharing the show with your friends, coworkers, families, peers, and all those other people that you think could find it useful. But if you'd like to do more, we did set up a Patreon account. There's a link on the website. Feel free to check out those rewards and levels, and thank you for that support. But other than that, if you want to keep the conversation going, leave us a comment in the show notes, along with all of the links and stuff that Allison brought forward. That'll all be there. Continue the conversation, engage, and let's see what we can learn. But as always, thank you everyone out there for being here. Thank you, Allison, for sharing your time and your wisdom. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great, let's see, this will probably be at night, so I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks for listening to Agile for Humans. Let's keep the conversation going. Drop us a question on Twitter at Agile for Humans or visit agileforhumans.com.